Welcome back. I'm Stephanie Ruhle. It's time for Money Power Politics. America's largest retailer is taking matter into their own hands in the wake of another mass shooting. Walmart announcing yesterday that it will discontinue sales of handgun ammunition and ammunition that can be used with military-style rifles. It will also stop all handgun sales in the state of Alaska, the last state the megastore still sold them. Right away, the NRA issued a response saying that Walmart's move won't make Americans any safer, saying this: it is shameful to see Walmart succumb to the pressure of the anti-gun elites. Lines at Walmart will soon be replaced by lines at other retailers who are more supportive of America's fundamental freedoms. Joining me now to weigh in, CNBC anchor and New York Times columnist, founder of the Deal Book, Andrew Ross Sorkin, Politico senior Washington correspondent Anna Palmer, and former spokesperson for the House Speaker John Boehner, Michael Steele, and former media director for Hillary Clinton's campaign, Joel Payne. And I got a full house, former aide to President George W. Bush, Elise Jordan. Mr. Sorkin, I must go to you first. You are the one who put yourself out there, and you wrote an open letter in the New York Times to Walmart CEO Doug McMillon, calling on him to act. He did, and you heard from him yesterday. What did he say?
You know, I got an email from him before the announcement went out, and I was surprised, happily surprised. I think this is a momentous decision, a watershed moment that really could change the conversation, not because of what he did in stores themselves, which is important, but because of what it symbolizes. So many CEOs across the country have been unwilling to engage in this debate in a public way, have been afraid, more out of fear than anything else. Privately, they talk about wanting to do something. They talk about wanting to go to Washington to do something, but have thus far, for the most part, been unwilling to do so. And I think that this may give the rest of the business community license to do that. I'd also suggest, even beyond the measures that are taken in store, he wrote letters yesterday to the president. He wrote letters yesterday to Congress calling on them to have a meaningful debate around reinstating the assault weapon ban, to have a meaningful conversation about funding science and funding research on gun violence, which is an epidemic in this country. And I think that's where you're going to see the real change, when you can actually see business not just taking their own steps in their own hands, but actually going to Washington and using all of that lobbying money that they have used, oftentimes for their own benefit historically, but on this issue because it's now become a business issue. It's happening, and these massacres are happening in their own stores.
What could be, Andrew, the negative business impact? NRA very clearly threatening them, saying people aren't going to be showing up to your store. It's easy for us to sit in New York newsrooms in a like-minded city among like-minded people and say, this is how the world should run. But look, Doug McMillon knows America. He knows who his employees are. He knows who his customers are. And Walmart is also a family-founded company, and you've got the Waltons sitting over him.
Look, you have Walmart employees who were signing petitions last week for him to take steps like this. You have polls in this country that show that people want reasonable gun sales. Will there be a backlash? There'll be a backlash of some sort. By the way, when Ed Stack, who deserves a lot of credit, the former, not the former, but the CEO of Dick's Sporting Goods, when he made this decision, there was blowback, but their earnings are actually doing better than they ever have. So I think that this idea of the blowback, the idea of where the American public on this issue, in terms of responsible gun sales, I think is much farther ahead than where the laws are today.
All right, Anna, it's one thing for businesses to do this. It's a big deal. Politicians still are not acting in a significant way. The Washington Post Ed Board calling directly on Mitch McConnell to do something in a full-page op-ed. What do you think is going to happen next?
Well, I think it really depends on one person, and that is Donald Trump. Yesterday, you had Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell go on Hugh Hewitt saying he was unclear at where the president stands on this issue. I think there's a lot of Republicans that privately want to do something here, and some even publicly who have come forward saying we need to do with some issues, whether it's looking at some of the different laws. But nothing really significant is going to happen unless the president gives Republicans cover on this issue. I think there's a lot of fear around it. There's a lot of fear of the NRA. A lot of fear of what could happen at the ballot box, which is ultimately oftentimes when things either move or don't move in Washington.
Michael, you've worked with Congress. Do you believe Walmart's move and the letters Doug McMillon sent are going to have any sort of impact?
I do. Look, the Washington Post is exactly wrong and Anna Palmer is exactly right. The only person that can make this happen is President Trump. Senator McConnell's favorite maxim is that there's no education in the second kick of a mule. He has had the rug pulled out from under him by President. There is no education in the second kick of a mule. He has had the rug pulled out from under him by President Trump before. He is not going to put his senators, his members, through a tough, divisive debate on this issue without a clear signal from the president about what he will sign. And the president needs to give that signal and be consistent about it publicly before the Senate is going to act.
Joel, we learned that the shooter in Odessa, Texas, avoided a background check by purchasing his firearm in a private sale. This guy failed previous background checks. Does this, the situation that we just saw several days ago in Texas, change the argument for background checks? Clearly, there are loopholes and they're being used.
Yeah, and look, no piece of legislation or policy is going to be foolproof, and I don't think anybody, Second Amendment advocates or people who want more gun control, feel that way. But I think that, critical mass is surrounded around the idea that we have to do something. And look, I actually just like to pay attention to atmospherics here. The president did something after Parkland, because the sea had changed, the ground had changed beneath his feet. People have grown tired of thoughts and prayers, and they've moved very quickly to sick and tired. And I think that's why the president has been working with people like Chris Murphy over the last few weeks. That's why this latest effort hasn't died yet. It's because there's actual momentum to do something here. And I think the people that matter, the people like Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell, years ago would have already said nothing's going to happen. This isn't time for this debate. That's changed. That's fundamentally changed because, frankly, I think that the culture war on guns has been won by the progressives. And I think you're going to see something here very shortly coming out of Congress that the president is going to support. That's what I would project from what's going on.
Elise, call me naive or just a nerd for liking math, but the latest Quinnipiac poll shows that Democrats and Republicans, 72% of voters, believe Congress needs to do something to reduce gun violence. And if 72% isn't a big enough number, 93% say they support universal background checks. Can this be moved from a political issue and simply be made a national safety issue?
Well, I think the public is reflecting what you see in those polls is that that's where the public is. They want to go into stores and they want to feel safe. That's why Walmart's CEO moved in that direction. You have the private sector moving forward when the government and our lawmakers are just stagnant. But just to go back to echo the panel and what Anna and Michael and Joel were saying, this is really in Trump's court right now. Mitch McConnell has no incentive to do anything if he's going to be left high and dry. And as Joel also pointed out, there wasn't a political penalty for Trump moving to ban bump stocks. So what really would there be that much of a penalty if he did pass some common sense gun reform in the case of background checks and closing person-to-person loopholes? Might be a little more politically risky for him to close the gun show loophole, but he certainly could move to ban person-to-person transfers.
But then let's stay on the numbers. Anna, CEOs make decisions based on money. What will help them make money? What will help them lose money? Politicians make decisions on what will get them elected and stay in office. Why is it that doing something on guns proves or seems to be so politically risky for these politicians when every day we're talking about how the NRA has lost a lot of its power?
Yeah, I think this is really the question of, is this going to be the top issue where voters go in and vote on this issue? Are they going to see a backlash among Republicans, among their voters, and vote some of them out of office? You see Michael Bloomberg and others try to make this a big issue in some of these elections, and they have had very little success.
Well, they did
and I think you also just have to put in
midterms.
I'm sorry, what?
Mike Bloomberg had a lot of success in the 2018 midterms.
Yeah, with specific races, but not at the Senate level. And I really do think one of the biggest issues is, and I think it's frustrating to people like yourself and to people around the country, is Washington often doesn't get things done. It is much easier to stop things than it is to actually get something done, particularly on charged issues like this.
I'd agree. I agree with Anna's point, and that's why I think it's so notable that it hasn't been stopped yet. Nobody's come out and said nothing's going to happen, and that's because the sea has changed on this issue. And I think it cannot be stated enough that Republicans understand that they have to do something because the public support around this issue has changed so much over the last year and a half.
Hey Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.